I first want to say welcome to Sharing Alumni Advice Wednesdays with our Student Alumni Association. Tonight is our Strategic Information and Defense event, and to kick things off, we do want to acknowledge that people are coming from all different parts of the world and from different time zones. So we want to thank you for coming tonight and joining us. We want this to be conversational, so we're going to introduce in just a few moments a few different ways that we're going to incorporate student questions into this event. First, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is McKenna Meager. I am the Vice President of Training and Development in our Student Alumni Association. And tonight I am going to host the event alongside Hamza, who will introduce himself as well.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Hamza. I am a junior computer science major here at UMass. So I think I'll say that you can send questions in to me in the chat, and I can prompt the panelists on the next pause. Or you could try using the raise hand feature, and we can call on you. Whatever is more comfortable for you. And that's one of the ways that we're going to try to get this more of a conversational feel like we would last in our previous years.
Thank you, Hamza. We are also joined by Lindsay McGrath, who is the advisor of our Student Alumni Association. She's the very best, and she's here to help with hosting as well. All right, we're going to tab along so we can introduce our panelists. We have 4 alumni here with us tonight. Perfect. Thank you, Hamza. The first being Sade, and she's going to introduce herself first.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sade Lawoye. I'm class of 2015. I graduated with a bachelor's in electrical engineering and a minor in mathematics. After UMass Amherst, I moved to Florida, Orlando, Florida, to work with a aerospace and defense contractor. And then soon right after, I joined their rotational program, where I was fortunate to travel to different sites and different programs to learn more about the company culture and be a well-rounded employee. Currently, I live in Baltimore, Maryland, where I work as a systems engineer, and I do integration and test on our programs.
Thank you so much. The next alumni we have here with us tonight is Scott, and he's going to introduce himself as well.
Hi, everybody. My name is Scott Chaplin. I graduated from UMass in 1989 with a degree in psychology. After UMass, I moved to Washington, D.C. for law school and attended law school at American University. After a federal clerkship and a short career at a couple of big law firms in D.C., I went in-house and have had a career at several different defense contractors over the course of the last several years. Currently, I am living out in beautiful, sunny San Diego, California, and I'm the Chief Legal and People Officer for a company called Shield AI, where we produce and innovate software and aerial robotics for special forces and the military.
Thank you for that introduction, Scott. Next, we have John Moynihan. John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, McKenna. Hello, my name is John Moynihan. I graduated in 1983 from UMass. Right after graduation, I went to work for the Massachusetts Department of Revenue, Massachusetts equivalent of the IRS. Performed several different functions there. The last 10 years, I was the Chief Information Security Officer, so I was responsible for building, creating, and managing the agency's information security program. It's a $30 billion agency. We collected and distributed $30 billion a year. So very large threat landscape. Time I was the Chief Information Security Officer, we were really transitioning from a lot of manual processes to automation. So the risk for tax information was very high. So did that. 2007 left and started a cybersecurity company called Minuteman Governance. Not a coincidence as far as the name Minuteman. So I named it after UMass, and I've been running that company, the owner and the president of that company since then.
Thank you, John. And our 4th panelist here tonight is Brian. Brian, do you want to introduce yourself and your position as well?
Sure, of course. Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Brian Hickey. I graduated UMass as a computer systems engineering major in 2015, as you see there on the screen. And since that time, I've been with Raytheon Company, or what's now Raytheon Technologies, due to a merger we had recently this year. But in this capacity, I'm in a chief engineer staff type role. And what that means is on some of our larger defense programs and aerospace programs in Europe, the Middle East, and in Asia, I provide technical leadership and kind of guidance to ensure essentially that the customer gets what they're looking for and hopefully if all goes well, what they signed up for. So kind of seeing that program life cycle through there. And we kind of respond, as you read about in the news, the world is a changing place and threats are kind of dynamic. So as you would imagine in a defense type capacity, the work is always interesting. So that's a little bit about me.
Perfect. Thank you all for your introductions. As we've kind of mentioned already, we're going to take questions in a couple of different avenues tonight. The first being the raise hand feature. If you click participants on your Zoom screen on the bottom bar there, it will pop up a little sidebar and there is a raise hand feature at the bottom there that you can certainly use. And that way I'll know that you have a question and I can call on you by name. Also, you can direct questions to Hamza privately in the chat and he can cue you in to ask verbally, or he can ask for you if you don't feel comfortable speaking out loud. That is totally fine. Any of those ways works great. So just keep those in mind as we move through tonight. So at this point, we're going to start off with kind of a general question about COVID-19 and to all. Oh, I'm going to pause that for just a second. Yes, this is being recorded. So if you do ask a question, your question will be in the recording. If you, like I said, if you don't feel comfortable with that, feel free to just ask in the chat and we can ask it for you. Thank you so much for that question. So to continue on, our first question for tonight is how has COVID-19 affected your job experience? And before I turn that over to the panelists, I just want to remind everybody that all four of our panelists do work in fields that they can't necessarily share specifics about their day-to-day work. So in some questions, they might not be able to be super specific. So just keep that in mind as you're asking your questions. And they've all said they will do their best to answer what they can, and what they can't, they will just have to leave out. So yes, how has COVID-19 affected your job? And whoever feels compelled can begin with that one.
So I can start on that question. So I would say it's affected me in large ways, but also not in large ways. Being in defense, there's obviously puts and takes that go with that, compared to being in commercial industries. But one of those puts, I would say, is that the industry is pretty stable, and a lot of times if there are larger economic events or trends that are going on around us, right, as we're all aware of, defense spending, is a fairly straight line, at least historically speaking. And so for me personally, it means more working from home, but I've been very fortunate in the sense that I can work from home. A lot of people don't have that. That is a bit of a luxury. So for me, if you have to go into the office, right, a lot of folks do classified work or working in lab environments. They're still going in, and I think everybody's kind of getting used to the environment and the precautions that need to be taken. But it's been relatively stable for me. I would just say, as far as factors go that are larger than that, a little bit than the individual. My company merged with a commercial company in the past year or so. Pretty much right after COVID, really became a thing in the March-April timeframe, and so that company on the commercial side is involved with aviation and passenger travel and things of that nature. So they've been hurting quite a bit more. So I think in the short term, right, there's puts and takes like I mentioned, but long term, you have to see what happens also a little bit too. So that's a bit of my experience.
I think Brian makes a good point about the industry, and that tracks with my experience as well at Shield AI. The industry continues, particularly on the military side and defense side, to be fairly stable. Since the pandemic, I think we've hired, 30 to 50 people, and we continue to grow pretty rapidly despite the pandemic. The change for us have been is, of course, like with everyone, shifting to remote work. Most of our employees are software engineers, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, AI engineers, platform engineers. And so most everyone can and does work from home right now. We do, but because we supply drones and aerial robotics to the US government, we were considered are considered an essential service. So even our manufacturing plant out here in San Diego, where we manufacture the drones that we build, has been allowed to stay open. And we've had to change our working style and gone from 1 shift to 3 shifts so that we can have people on the line that are socially distanced and working different shifts. But it surely hasn't kind of stopped our productivity. And in fact, while nothing good comes from a pandemic, I mean, our business has thrived. And we, some of the biggest changes have been interviewing and onboarding people remotely, which is definitely different. But it's been interesting that, it's also opened up some other candidates that maybe otherwise we wouldn't have been able to take advantage of because they don't have to necessarily move to San Diego or one of our other offices in DC or Pittsburgh. And we've been able to, expand our candidate profile a little bit. So that's been actually helpful to business.
And for myself, as an overall perspective in the defense world, it's been stable. We are still being productive in our programs, meeting milestones, hiring people. We had a bunch of interns this summer. But my personal experience, it was a little bit of a transition. Before COVID, I was always in the office, and it's easy to, go to your colleague's desk to ask a quick question, get material information. Now we have to speak over IM, and we just introduced doing video calling, which has definitely helped. But I know it has been a great transition for everyone. And I know that even our customers are on board as well. So they have been with us every step of the way to make sure that we're able to meet our end of the year milestones.
Because my business is essentially consulting, and you really want me on site a lot. It has changed my delivery approach significantly. Downtown Boston is pretty much closed down in the last session of people. So most of my consulting engagements are being done remotely. A big part of my business is workforce awareness training. I'll go into a company, a large public agency, and create a training program. Although a lot of that is remote, many companies want part of the training, particularly for the senior leadership, to happen on site. And that just hasn't been able to happen. So being a consultant, someone who's a practitioner delivering services, this has changed my business a lot.
Great, thank you guys for those responses. So we don't have any questions in the chat currently. I do want to tell the audience, definitely feel free to ask me some questions, put them in the chat, and then I can forward them to the panelists, and it'll make it more interactive, more of an experience you can remember. But a question I know I've had is especially for Scott and John, going through years of in the corporate world, how has it been to climb that corporate ladder? I know, Scott, you're a chief legal officer, and John, you've mentioned that you were part of a chief information officer at one place, and now you've started your own cybersecurity company. And Brian, Sade, definitely feel free to contribute to this question. But what's that been like to climb the corporate ladder? What are some challenges when that comes to it, and some unique experiences you've had?
You want to take it, Scott?
Sure. Sure. So, yeah, I mean, my climb has been, long and steep, I guess I would say. But yeah, I mean, after law school, as I mentioned, I initially worked at a couple law firms in Washington, D.C. And I think I was a litigator for 4 years, and I think I knew pretty early on that was not something I wanted to do for the long term. And I was very fortunate that a partner that I worked for, pushed me to look at an in-house career. Said, you seem to have a good business sense, and clients really like you. Maybe it would be a good move to go work directly for a client. And then I was even more fortunate that he ended up, that same partner that I worked for at the law firm, got a job as a general counsel of a company and asked me to go with him. So, I had a mentor that kind of carried me around for a bit, which is extremely helpful. So anytime that you can find a great mentor, early in your career, I think that's really helpful for climbing the ladder and having someone that can help you, maneuver through those waters. And from there, I think I knew, as an associate attorney at a company, that I wanted to move up into that chief legal officer, um, role. And, as I looked for opportunities, one of the things that I did that I thought was really helpful was sometimes even, just stretching and interviewing for jobs that I knew were kind of a little bit out of my reach. But what I gained from that was, getting to hear, like, when I didn't get a job, what are the things that I lacked? And I would hear things like, well, you haven't managed other attorneys yet. So I put that on my to-do list, and told my boss, hey, I want to get myself into a situation where I can manage other attorneys. And I would hear other things about, expand your portfolio. And so I would go to my boss and say, hey, I want to learn more about employment law or more about other areas of the law. And so sometimes, even if you're not necessarily looking for a job, getting out there in the marketplace, you learn more about gaps that you need to fill to get those jobs that maybe you're not quite ready for. And that was really helpful for me. And as I kind of started checking those boxes, you start seeing, that the gaps get fewer and fewer, and then you really can start competing for those next opportunities. And once I got that first general counsel job, that first chief legal officer job, then you've kind of, arrived, and then you can start saying, do I want to move industries? Do I want to move to bigger companies, smaller companies? And I've had the privilege of, working at, technology startups all the way to Fortune 500 companies, which I'm, really proud to have been able to have that breadth and depth of experience. But I think it all kind of comes back to, finding early on that really critical mentor that can help you start paving the way and creating those steps up that ladder. I really don't know that I would have gotten where I have gotten if I didn't have a really positive mentor early in my career.
Hamza, my path has been really winding to get to this destination, and I want to really tell people out there about it and convey to them an important part of keeping an open mind. Back in the late 90s, I was director of internal audit at the Massachusetts Department of Revenue. Very high-profile job, very dynamic job, a job that could take you other places in private industry. One day I got a call from my boss, and I went up to his office. It was a Friday afternoon. He said, I have a new challenge for you. You're going to take over the information security function in the Mass Department of Revenue. Now, for all of you out there now, 25 years ago, information security was not the sexy topic it is today. It was a back office type of thing. And Scott, you know that. No one really wanted it. Now it's a big, high profile, glamorous job. So I was really resistant. I resisted that change. I wanted to stay as director of internal audit. Friday afternoon, my boss would go home and think about it. I thought about it and said, I don't want to take this position, but I have to take it. Thank God I did, because who would have known 25 years later, information in cybersecurity was going to be one of the most coveted, in-demand roles. So, I think you're all going to, as you set out in your career, have situations where you're confronted or you encounter an opportunity that doesn't look so great. And if I could just, impart this to you, keep an open mind. Keep an open mind on a role that you may not think fits you right then. That might not be the perfect role for you, because in my situation, it completely changed my life. I was able to learn, quite frankly, a skill that's very marketable now. That skill allowed me to start my own company. And that would have happened, without a doubt, that would have never happened if I had closed down on that opportunity and said, no, I'm going to stay where I am. I don't want to be involved. So that's been my path. That's how I got here. And I'm glad I had the flexibility to keep an open mind on that opportunity.
Right. Awesome. Brian, Sade, do you have anything to add to that?
I like what John said about keeping an open mind. That's one thing that really helped me my senior year. I was born and raised in Fall River, Massachusetts, and I never would have thought to move out of the state to work for any company. But my senior year, I was presented with an offer to work in Orlando, Florida. I had no family, no friends, was going into the corporate world in a field I did not know too much of. But being open-minded and taking that opportunity really helped me, and that has opened up many doors and possibilities for me. So that's one thing I highly encourage for students at UMass. Be open-minded, not just location, job-wise. You never know what opportunity will lay in your hands that can possibly change your life.
Yeah, and I would just foot stomp that sentiment in both cases, excuse me. One being it's certainly not a straight line, no matter how much planning you do. And it's really easy to sit here and say, I'll be there, in 2 years or 5 years or whatever the aperture is. And that's just typically not the way it goes. And I think it's probably almost never the way it goes. So be comfortable with that uncertainty, and be able to adapt to it and just kind of be dynamic. And then the second thing, just kind of foot stomping what Scott said earlier was the value system truly changes, when you go from being in undergrad or grad to being in industry. And all of a sudden you're graded on things and you have to be proficient, with things, behaviors, whatever it might be, that all of a sudden, totally weren't even in your view before. So for being successful in that environment, I would just say learn what those are, learn what you're being graded on, whether you want to be graded on them or not, right? Learn what they are and try to, close those gaps because that's going to get you to the next level as expeditiously as possible.
Great. So we have a question in the chat. Really excited for it. So, how have each of you found a way to stand out as a candidate and demonstrate that you're a self-starter or a communicator as a leader or something? And specifically, if Sade wouldn't mind talking more about the leadership program she got into and how that affected it, but definitely I'd love to hear responses from all of the alumni.
So I can touch a little bit on the leadership program. So I work at Lockheed Martin, and we have leadership development programs for operations, engineering, finance, communication, HR. So I'm currently in the engineering rotational program, and it's 3 years where you get the opportunity to rotate between 6 and 12 months to different areas in the company or programs, sites. And this is really geared to breed the next leaders of the company. When our future, directors and VPs graduate, they need upcoming leaders to take their place. So this rotational program is really geared to help our employees to be more well-rounded, know the technologies that's going on, and just prepare them to be the next leader for the company. So the way to stand out is really just taking initiative, and coming out of your comfort zone and asking a lot of questions. There's a saying that 10% of what you learn in college is what you use. But a lot of that is kind of true. On a hands-on job, you're learning a lot of material. But you really need to be open-minded and ask a lot of questions to get that knowledge that you need to perform your duties in your job. And by showing that initiative and willingness to learn, it helps your colleagues and managers see that you're really taking the initiative to be a better employee and to help the company meet their milestones. So I definitely suggest, take initiative, even if it's a role that you're not comfortable with. At least it shows that you have the willingness to learn and to be more well-rounded as well.
Does anybody else want to add on to that about how to stand out in your field, stand out in general with specific character traits?
I had a couple of things there. I mean, I think you never know what's going to be something that makes you stand out. And so I think sometimes there's there's the temptation to only talk about those things that are directly related to a job or a company. But I'll tell you from an experience I had that was completely unexpected. When I was at UMass, I was actually a member of the UMass Jazz Ensemble, and I've been a fairly successful musician, my whole youth. And I was the only person that was accepted into the UMass Jazz Ensemble that wasn't a music major. And when I was there, we had won national and international competitions. We're on the cover of Downbeat magazine. I don't know what's happened to the jazz program at UMass lately, but I know when I was there, it was a very successful program. And I left that behind. It was a hobby. It wasn't something that I intended to be a profession. But then post law school, when I was coming out of law school and applying to federal clerkships, most law students, apply to every judge that you can, and you do a mass mailing. I got one interview with one judge, and I went to that interview, and I ended up getting that clerkship, having nothing to do with law school, but interestingly, because she was a jazz fan, and she saw that on my resume and was really interested about that. And she asked me a question that I still ask today to everyone that I interview now 20 years later, which is, I'm looking for people that, value excellence and greatness in what they do. And most people that value excellence and greatness, do that in many things in their life. So tell me something other than the law that where you've strove for some excellence and greatness in your life. And clearly music was one of them. And I asked that question of all candidates I interviewed today, and you learn amazing things about people. And those are the things that kind of stand out to me. Learning that a lawyer was an Olympian that I hired. Learning that a lawyer had had a totally different career that wasn't reflected on their resume. And so I think finding those opportunities to distinguish yourself and stand out in a way other than maybe the field you're in could be that discriminating factor. And the other thing I'll say on this topic is be a hand raiser. I mean, it was never my intent. It was my intent to go into law. It was not my intent to go into HR, but now I find myself a chief HR officer as well at two other companies. And that's because years ago, when our HR officer left and they just needed an executive to step in on a temporary basis, I said, I'll give that a shot. I mean, I don't have any experience, but I'll give it a shot. And then I got that experience, and later found myself being asked to be a chief HR officer the more and more experience I got. So it wasn't something that I intended to do, but now it's something that I think most lawyers don't have, and that makes me stand out a little bit. So, be willing to take on different challenges and be a hand raiser and tackle things that maybe you have no background or experience in, or even desire to, but you just don't know where it's going to lead you. So you don't want to miss those unexpected opportunities.
Hamza, by virtue of the fact that question, whoever asked that question is, first of all, thinking the right way, because to get ahead or to really achieve, particularly in today's environment, you have to distinguish yourself. You have to have that mindset. And as both Sade and Scott said, it's doing the extra thing. It's not being afraid to tackle a tough job. I was an athlete at UMass. I played basketball, and when you're an athlete, or when you grow up as an athlete, really don't shy away from tough situations. When I was running the information security program at the Mass Department of Revenue, it's the people that came to me and wanted to be involved in the difficult investigations, the difficult forensic reviews, that I always took notice. And I always, said to myself, okay, that person's showing initiative. I'm going to send, I had an employee. She was always looking for more. So I sent her down to Duke. Duke had an executive management program that the Massachusetts state government had a relationship with. She went to Duke with this program, an executive management program. She came back. She got a really high-level job in another agency. But I noticed her because of her tenacity, because she always wanted to get involved in tough things. So, whether it's music, as Scott said, or athletics, just leverage something that makes you competitive, makes you come out, because you have to distinguish yourself if you really want to achieve, particularly in today's environment, because there are throngs of multitudes of people out there. You have to distinguish yourself.
I like that line, Scott, be a hand raiser. I like that perspective on it. And that question as well is very interesting. I wonder if maybe we can pose that question back to the other three of you that didn't kind of highlight that like Scott did, because I find that perspective quite interesting. But it did sound like we had a question that someone wanted to ask. Aliyah, was that you? She's going to unmute.
Yes, awesome. Hello, everybody. My name is Aliyah as well. So yeah, I do have a question for you guys. some of you kind of touched on it, so I had another question, and it's more along of the lines of what was your first job when you graduated from UMass, and kind of how do you think current UMass grads or upcoming UMass grads can kind of handle this current situation that we're in to find a job in this current field or in the field that you all are respectively?
Well, I can take that on first if you want. My first job, and it wasn't so long ago, was I was writing what we call system requirements as a systems engineer. And what you do is on a line by line basis, you write out, the system will do this, the system will do that, and it turns out it's not very exciting, or at least it wasn't for me.
No.
And yeah, as yeah, as you would imagine, right? It just wasn't the right fit for me. Some people are very good at it. I wasn't. I wasn't detailed oriented enough to do it. So I think the short answer to that question is to in this environment, you have to kind of come to terms quickly with what you're good at, number one, what your strengths and weaknesses are, but also matching that to the need. I think from a jobs perspective alone, there are plenty of industries right now, defense comes to mind, that are still hiring, and the job market, is arguably, on a level playing field, equally or maybe even less competitive than it was this time last year. And there's certainly industries where that's not the case, and in fact, defense might be in the minority. But I would encourage you to take a look and see where those opportunities are. And I know it's tough, but take a look at the industries that have done well and industries that haven't done well post-COVID. I mean, there's some, the Amazons of the world, right? That's the obvious example. They've done really well, since COVID has happened. So I think that where there's lack of opportunity in a lot of areas and a lot of industries have been devastated, it's kind of like whenever a door closes, another one opens, and I would look for those open doors.
Hey, that's a great question. My first job was really a lousy job. 1983, when I got out of UMass, I started with the Mass Department of Revenue. But I started in the collections division. That meant we had to actually contact people and collect delinquent tax liabilities. When I said contact them, these are people that weren't answering the phone to respond to letters. So we had to drive to their businesses, restaurants, retailers, manufacturers, and try to collect delinquent tax liabilities. Now, to give us some perspective of how bad the economy was when I got out of UMass, unemployment rate in 1983 was 12%. We're in the middle of a pandemic now. We have an 8% unemployment rate. There were no jobs. So when I got that job as a collector in the Mass Department of Revenue, I was really thrilled to have it. And so I worked hard at it. And the fact that it was a big organization, I kept telling myself, there's more here for me. This isn't my last job. I just want to do this job well, hang in there. And how to really leverage, I think you should leverage your connections. It's fine to go on Indeed and LinkedIn to find a job, but I think it's really helpful if you can leverage people in your community that might work at maybe Mass General or a big state agency or Fidelity Investments. That is often a good way into an organization rather than just going on submitting your resume to some job board. So, that's how I got the job in state government. My aunt worked in the Mass Department of Revenue and found out about a job there. So that was my first job, and my best advice is to leverage relationships to find that first foot in the door.
So my first job, I worked as a systems engineer, but I performed testing. So the software developers would produce code and it will come to me and I will verify that that code was working correctly. And I enjoyed it. It was fun. I was able to get a lot of customer interaction, engagement. Customers would come to our site and we would demo our product to them. So it was really great to hear their feedback and to see how much of an impact that our system, our product was making for them and saving lives. A tip of advice that I would do, that I would say about gaining jobs is definitely utilize your network. I know different majors have professional organizations that they can go to. For example, electrical engineering, there's IEEE, or there's Society of Women Engineers, or NSBE, National Society of Black Engineers. You can use your network to see what different opportunities are out there. that's how I received my job at Lockheed Martin. I attended one of the conferences hosted by the National Society of Black Engineers in California, and I was able to get an interview with Lockheed Martin, and I was hired on the spot. So if I was not introduced to that organization or joined their professional program at UMass Amherst, who knows where I would be today. So I definitely recommend whatever major, if it's engineering or not, look for different professional organizations that are geared to what fields you want to go into. And through that, you'll be able to seek mentors, internships, even scholarships to help you land that dream job.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say when I think back to my first job, I mean, I'll just say something that's probably not particularly inspiring, but it's honest. I was coming off of 7 years of education, 4 at UMass, 3 years of law school. And if I'm being really honest, it was about money then. It was about, I need to pay this debt. I did not want to spend the rest of my life with this debt on my shoulders. And so when I was interviewing for jobs, I knew whoever gave me the best offer, that was the job I was taking. But I think I also knew that it was just a job, and it was a start, and that I would have plenty of time, and thankfully have had plenty of time to build a career. And I think, job decisions and career decisions to me are very different. Sometimes we take a job because we have to, because it's the one that's available and the one that's there, or the one that can pay the bills, or the one that can get me out of my debt. But then, I got in that job and said, now how can I leverage this job to start building a career? And that's a very different thought process. And it goes to all the things that I think my colleagues on the panel are saying about networking, about industry, but also having the patience to know that careers get built over time, and that one job, doesn't dictate your career. And you've got a lot of different opportunities. So for me, it was simply, that first job came out of a need, which was to get myself out of debt, and having the patience to know that I had time to build the career.
Thank you all for those answers. Another question I wanted to pose to all of you, Shade, you kind of mentioned this a little bit with the resources you used at UMass to connect yourself and to further explore your career path. But do you guys, how did UMass prepare you for your job currently? And maybe looking back, is there anything you wish you had taken advantage of that maybe you didn't? A lot of people have said study abroad, and we all know, but we can't exactly do that right now. So if it's that, maybe that and something else.
I'll say one thing that UMass taught me that has served me well is resilience. I remember thinking back, making my college decision, and I don't know about now, but back then, I had some hesitancy. I grew up in Foxborough, small town, and I think I wanted to go to a small school because I was nervous about a big school like UMass Amherst, and was I going to get lost? And I'd heard things like, "Oh, you're just a number there." That was not my experience at all, because I got there and decided I wasn't going to let myself be a number. And so, UMass Amherst taught me resiliency, to get to know professors, to, ensure that I was heard and I just wasn't in the back of the room, turning into a number. But if you own that, and I think the one great thing about, many great things about UMass, but one great thing about UMass is whatever you make of it. And if you can find a way to be heard and to get to the front of the class, and I think it teaches a lot of resilience. And then when I got in my career, I think I knew that I had to build it myself. And I, especially in law school, where I went to law school with a lot of kids that had been to small private schools, and and where things had been handed to them, and I don't think they had learned that element of resiliency. And that has always served me well, and I owe 100% of that to UMass, and teaching me the skills to forge my own path and to be resilient and adaptable. And I don't know that I would have been as resilient as I am if I had gone to a different school.
What I would add to that conversation a little bit is, UMass, I think as an engineer, this is easy to say also, But it's a way of thinking, right? And I think any education at the collegiate level is about, thinking, critical thinking, and how to approach problems. I think you'll all find, soon enough that you'll go into your careers and you're going to be tasked with, helping to solve or solving some of the world's frankly most challenging problems, right? I mean, they talk about it as a generational thing, right? You are the next generation. And I think that, the problems are going to be different. The problems change every day. But the way that you go about solving them, the process that you use internally and the way that you resolve those issues and you work through them, methodically, I think that's something that UMass taught me and prepared me well once I got into industry. Another thing I would think it taught me, which I would second what you were saying, Scott, is almost work ethic, if you can put it that simply. In my undergrad, right, I was working, late nights, an all-nighter here or there, right, and I think that the one thing that sets me apart from my peers in industry, from what I've seen, so far, has been the work ethic has stuck with me. I'm not the smartest person, that I work with. Things don't always come easily to me. It takes time. But I was always, at least so far so good, right? Willing to put in more time than other folks were to understand things, and to try to, get ahead of problems that way. And that's worked well so far. So that's definitely something I can attribute to UMass.
I could talk about this all night about what UMass did for me, but what my experience has been, no matter how smart you are, how accomplished you are, you have to need to be able to get along all types of people. That's one thing UMass did for me. They throw you into the towers in the Southwest. You're going to encounter and live with all types of folks from all types of social and economic backgrounds. And the most successful people I know are the people that can navigate that. That's what's great about UMass for me. Everybody I found was the same at UMass. It didn't matter what town you were from or what city you were from or how much money your parents had. UMass had a kind of a way to level the playing field. And I really enjoyed that part of it because you learn to get along and meet people and engage people on that level in a very honest way. And, I've met people throughout the years from more insulated, smaller educational experiences, and I don't think they had that gift that UMass people had from dealing with everybody on all levels. That's really one of the best things UMass did for me.
And for me, I think UMass definitely helped me with my work ethic. I was heavily involved on campus at UMass Amherst. And there's a lot of stuff that I went through with student organizations. I see similarities in the work field. For example, on campus, where you had to submit proposals for funding or doing or developing
right now, yes.
yes, or developing programs. It's similar to what we're going through now, developing proposals and dealing with people from diverse backgrounds, which definitely has helped me be a more people person and being engaging, and just treating everyone as you like to be treated.
Thank you all for those answers. For sure, work ethic and the UMass definitely, I would agree, has a way of evening the playing field, and it is what you make of it. And I think when I applied to college, I didn't ever look at it in the sense of, oh, how many opportunities are there to pick from? And really, at UMass, you have a whole big, huge list of things you can take advantage of if you are willing to put in the work, which is really special. It sounds like Hamza has some questions in the chat. Hamza?
Yeah. So, what would you all recommend for students looking for an internship or their first job? What would help set UMass students apart if you were going back and you were still in the process, or what were things that you did during that process?
I would definitely say start as early as possible. I think when I was a freshman, a lot of people discouraged me, stating like freshmen are too early. It's too early to find internships. But after your first semester, I would recommend the more experience you have, the better. And experience not cannot only be, work experience, but that you can use your projects, any extracurricular activities that you do, if you do mobile, applications on the side or robotics. Those are all experience that employers like to see. Um, so definitely start early. It's never too early to look for opportunities, if it's either internships or research as well.
I would also say when you go into the interview, when you get to that stage, depending on the companies you're talking to, know the company, know who you're talking to, know what they do, know what they're all about. It's totally like, now I'm on the other side of it. It's totally amazing, to see how many times we have people that interview and it's like they crossed out, their resume, and then just changed the name at the top of it, and now it's company X, and they have no understanding of what the company does or whatever. And you don't have to be an expert on it. There's no expectation of that. But believe it or not, counterintuitively, I would have said at the time, going in and knowing what the company does and having that, situational awareness is a huge needle mover. The second thing that I would say, and it sounds silly, but send thank you notes after you interview. Follow up the interview. That's something that I learned from my girlfriend that I didn't do originally, but it was shocking to me, like astounding when I found that out. Like, it makes all the difference, and it shows that you truly value the time that the interviewers and the company has spent trying to get to know you, and it goes a long way.
Times on just a broader context on internships, they're invaluable for an eventual or maybe subsequent career at that organization. Many places hire a large percentage of their interns. An internship is really important, particularly in this environment.
Shameless plug, we have an internship program that we're interviewing for right now. If anyone is interested in coming to work in beautiful San Diego, California for a summer, although it's always summer here. But I also will just repeat what Brian said. I mean, as someone who's now interviewing potential interns, it is amazing sometimes that people don't really understand the companies that they're talking to. And I have to admit, it's kind of an easy X, for us to just say, yeah, we've got so many qualified applicants. If they're not really even sure who we are or what we do, that's an easy no for us. So I mean, he can't be more dead on with that. Like, understand who you're talking to.
And if I can add one more thing, dress professionally. I've interviewed interns that look like they just come off the beach. You have to have something to call them when you go into an organization. I mean, you don't have to have a tuxedo or a ball gown on, but you have to have the right decorum for the organization.
I have a brief question for the three of you, as it sounds like you do a lot of interviewing. I definitely do the thank you note quite frequently, but in this time of COVID, I have found it funny because an email thank you note seems impersonal. However, it's a little bit harder to, you don't know the address maybe, or if people aren't in the office, so you can't really send it to the office. What do you guys share that same, that an email one is a little bit more impersonal, or do you feel like it still sends the same message?
I would take it from the context of looking at the playing field, right? Remember, you're setting yourself apart relative to the people that don't even think about sending it at all. So anything is better than nothing, and whatever the medium is, sending a handwritten note, right, has a nice, kind of old-fashioned, vibe to it that I think is more personal. But an email is 1,000 times better than not doing it at all.
I agree, McKenna. You're not gonna get their home address, so you can't send it to their house.
Right. My friend and I had this conversation of like, man, what do we do here? So interesting to get that perspective from you guys. Thank you for that random little question there. But it sounds like Hamza has one more question, and then we're gonna start wrapping up from the chat here.
Right. I hope I described this correctly, but how flexible are your workplaces or just your career in general have been in regards to doing very individual technical work? So like, I know in computer science, like software engineers, sitting at their desk doing work, obviously contributing to a team, or like the student mentions, working on AutoCAD software versus doing all that. So doing all that individual work versus shifting over to doing more teamwork based items, working in things like HR, things of that sort. So I guess what we're trying to say here is basically how flexible has your experience been? Do you feel like you have the ability to go from a technical standpoint and go to a more non-technical, more team-based standpoint? And how has that experience been? Have any of you had that experience so far? I think the most to clear up a little bit, it's similar to having. I know a lot of students, computer science students, they're interested in being software engineers, but they would like to transition to being product managers, where they are dealing more with teamwork and doing more things outside of the technical realm.
I'll say, I mean, I know at my company, we have a lot of people that have moved around in different roles, and so I think as an employer, we're pretty flexible. One thing I would say, that if that's something that's important to you and you want to keep a lot of opportunities open from an interview perspective, I would ask, a question like, what are some of the things that other people in this role have done? And that will open up getting some information about have people in most people in that role that you're interviewing for just in one trajectory, or do they have examples of people that have been in that role that have pivoted to other roles or even other functions or other departments or completely other fields? And I think that will give you a good flavor for whether that's a company that embraces that level of flexibility. But I don't know if that completely answers the question, but that's what I would, from an advice perspective, that's what I would say.
Sounds great. Yeah. Does anybody else have anything to add with that?
Yeah, I haven't experienced that transition, but I know at Lockheed Martin, we have like one-on-ones with our managers, with our leaders, and that is a time where you have an open communication to just discuss your career goals. So that's really a great opportunity to let your leader know, like, I'm interested in, X, Y, and Z. Do you see any opportunities for me to grow or any areas I can learn to be proficient in this area? So by keeping that open communication with your leader, not only is he helping you to gain those skills, so when that right opportunity opens, you'll be ready. He's also looking out to see if there's any opportunities that are there that you can start using as a stretch assignment.
I would just add to that, going from an individual contributor, as we would call it, to some sort of a managerial or a leadership position. I think the one word that I would use that it comes down to that I've seen is credibility. There's a lot of people that have leadership skills and soft skills, but have no idea what the product is or how it works. Because they missed it on the early kind of foundationals. It depends on the industry, the products that you're dealing with, et cetera. But I would encourage folks, to be an individual contributor and kind of learn the product, learn the technical details, whatever those might be, before going into more of a team leadership type position, because it gives you time to learn for starters, but it gives you the perspective that you need to understand the problems that the team may have or the challenges that you'll work through. Because otherwise, if you haven't seen it, you're really set up for an impossible task where it's going to be hard to succeed. So I would say, depending on the company that you're at and the culture, there's typically a path to go from an individual contributor to a leader, but it's typically in that order.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
Yes. All right. So just to kind of wrap things up, we've been ending these SAA Wednesdays with each panelist giving maybe like a 30-second overarching advice, uh, you know, final piece of advice to a UMass student looking for a job, which I know is something we've kind of covered. But if there's anything else any of you wanted to add to that, in like a 30-second spiel, maybe I'll start with John. Do you want to start on that one?
I would just follow up on what I mentioned before, kind of that if you could just be flexible, because where you think you want to be today, it's unlikely that's where you're going to be. And if the folks that are inflexible, I think it really impedes their progress. So going into a new job, going into a new role, going into a new organization, to keep an open mind and entertain anything that comes to you. That way, I think your path will be less cluttered.
Awesome. Scott, can I pass it along to you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I totally agree with everything that John said, by the way, and so I will double tap on that. I'll add to it and say, learn good networking skills early. I was not a good networker early in my career, and I always felt like it was an imposition, and now I'm on the other side of it, and I think most people want to help other people, and I wish I had been a little bit more aggressive. I think as a networker, and found other opportunities to network more effectively. So yeah, I would do it a little more shamelessly than if I would go back and do it all over again.
Awesome. Sade, do you want to carry on with that?
Yeah, sure. My piece of advice would be persistent and keep going. Life gets tough, but you know, you've got yourself this far and you can continue further. And also ask for help if need be. Definitely a support system, either finding a mentor would definitely help you in your college career and even professionally as well. So yeah, persistent and use your resources and mentorship.
Awesome. And Brian, do you want to close us out on this one?
Yeah, sure. So I would say, do your homework when you take a look at, roles that are out there. Um, Glassdoor, any of those companies, right, that, tell you about the experience. And compensation is an important thing too. There's so much data out there today, that wasn't out there, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever it was, for folks that were looking. So don't let it be a surprise, from a career perspective. There's so many easy ways to understand what a company's culture is and what they do and what you're getting into. So use those, right? That's what they're there for. And then on a final note, from a compensation perspective, always negotiate your salary. This is something that I've learned also the hard way, arguably. There's tons of information about there, about compensation as well. Know where you stand, know what your skill set is, even if you're just starting off and you don't have experience, right? Know what you're worth, and make sure that the company that you become a part of going forward also knows that.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing your wisdom and your advice with all of us. And thank you to attendees for coming and joining us and asking questions. We do just have a couple of closing thoughts here. The first being different career resources that are available to UMass students. Connect UMass is a new platform that just recently opened up to students. It's kind of like LinkedIn, however, only UMass alumni and students have access to it. So it's a great resource, and you can go in and you can filter by interests, jobs, major, or what have you, and connect with people that want to share their advice with you. So definitely students, take advantage if you have not already. It's a wonderful platform. Also listed other events on our UMass alumni page and Handshake. We do have one more SAA Wednesday left in our series, and it will be next Wednesday focusing on healthcare. So definitely come join us if you're interested in that. But to close this out, thank you all again for joining us. And thank you again, alumni, for sharing your advice. I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and we will see you soon.